listening to Give God 90, where we're not afraid of the tough biblical questions, because we will dig through the language, the culture, and the history to find the truth revealed in the words of our Creator.
I wanna see the light.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for letting us be part of your day. My name is Jerry Miller, your host for Give God 90. Sitting in her supervisor seat this evening is Myra.
Hello, everyone.
And she may do more than supervise tonight. We'll see. I might be the one winding up supervising. I don't know. We'll see as we go along. If you're new here, thank you for joining us. Make sure you check out GiveGod90.com. You know, it's free. It's there for you to use, and there's some neat stuff on there too, I think. But I'm biased because I put it on there. Okay. If you like what you hear, chances are your friends and family will enjoy it, and even your enemies should probably hear it as well. So make sure you hit those share buttons, like buttons, notifications, and that helps people find us easier. A lot of people have been doing that. When I look at the statistics, I am humbled. Really, I am. If you'd like to leave us a message directly on the podcast, you can do that if you have the free Spreaker app. You can utilize that, or you can find us on one of the many social media networks that we're on. When I did Monday's podcast, I didn't intend to go through all of what Proverbs 31 was looking at from from verse 8 or 10 on. But somebody was kind of insistent on it. Encouraging was not exactly the word I would use. She insisted that we continue.
You just have to.
Those were the words, yes. So, as we're going to keep looking at Proverbs 31, a little background for what you're about to hear might be a good thing. Like I said, I wasn't going to go as into depth with the rest of it as I would, but it's probably a good idea if we really understand where Solomon was coming from at the time he was writing this. I shouldn't say all of us. Many of us have been taught that women in the Bible were little more than property, and nothing really could be farther from the truth. Ruth, as you may know, was the great-grandmother of David, which would make her Solomon's great-great-grandmother. The firstborn of Ruth and Boaz is Obed, who was the father of Jesse, who was David's father. So not a great deal of time passed between the time of Ruth and when Solomon was born. Solomon wrote Proverbs 31. He was intimately familiar with the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, even though he, like his father, David, they had a little trouble keeping all of those things, right? You know, they had some issues, but they were typically, and for the most part, obedient. Now, they had written their own copies of Moses' writings, as was prescribed, in the presence of the priests. So when you write something down, you tend to understand it a little in more detail and more depth. So when he did that, it's interesting. When we think about those times, we often think women were treated poorly. Now, Solomon was born about 1,000 years before Jesus was born, sometime around 1010 BC. Those folks that lived at that time, they were not mere Neanderthals. They had a a developed civilization and had had a developed civilization for some time. So when Solomon writes that men and women are to treat each other equally, that may make some of us think, well wait a second. I thought it was primarily a patriarchal society, a society that was run by men. And in a sense, that's correct with some very important distinctions. Men were in charge of the government and men were in charge of the priesthood, but the writings of Moses make it clear that women are an important and integral part of that as well. For instance, priests have basically 3 categories of women that they are prohibited from marrying. They can't marry a prostitute. That's sort of wise, right? Who wants a priest who is married to someone who blatantly was a sinner? They can't marry a profane woman, and that likely means a woman who had sex outside of marriage. Okay? More than likely, it was someone who had been maybe not caught at committing adultery. And remember that adultery, both one person in that relationship had to be married. So it's possible that she may have had a child with someone else outside of marriage. There's a lot of things that goes into that we think of today as one thing, and we have corrupted those definitions. A priest couldn't marry someone who had been divorced. Also, they were not allowed to marry outside of the Hebrew people. And all of these things are to ensure that they remained as holy as possible. And like David and Solomon and Saul before them, that sometimes is, well, we make it more difficult than it needs to be. I'll just say it that way. But the role of women in the Bible is far more than we often think it is. It's far more than what today's societies make it appear to be. Now, rather than having Myra read all of the Proverbs 31 passage again, let's just read what I might get through today with a little luck. So go ahead and start in verse 10 and go down through 15.
It is hard to find an excellent wife. She is worth more than rubies. Her husband trusts her completely. With her, he has everything he needs. She does him good and not harm for as long as she lives. She looks for wool and linen. She likes to work with her hands. She is like a trader's ship. She goes far to get food. She gets up while it's still dark. She prepares food for her family. She also feeds her servant girls.
Now, as you may remember, the first 2 verses we looked at in some depth, and hopefully we realize it's not just about women. And it's really not just about men and women. It's about the marriage covenant. So I'm going to start in verse 12. She does him good and no harm as long as she lives. Well, what does it mean? She does him good. It literally means, if you go back and look at the original, to deal fully or adequately. It can also mean to wean, or it can mean to ripen. Now, this is how she's to live her life anyway, treating others with equal love and respect. But why is a wife supposed to remember these attributes? Well, we're all supposed to remember these attributes, right? But the next phrase reads like she is protecting her husband. And in a way she is, but not from harm as we might think about it in today's English. The word harm here, if you go back and read the original Hebrew, is actually evil. If a wife's not living the way the Creator designed us to live, Solomon's telling us that some evil may come to her husband and by extension to her family. Now think about that. If you're not doing the things you're supposed to be doing, that allows, oh, I shouldn't say it that way, that there's more potential and more influence of evil in your life. We'll say it that way. And evil comes in many different forms. So the need to prevent evil from intruding into the family, well, I'm just going to say it this way. If you follow the Creator's instructions, you don't have to worry about it. You're going to be able to see it. You're going to be able to recognize it. You're going to understand what it is, and you're going to know how to deal with it. What we know as verse 12 is a reminder to her that she is dealing with others outside of the family. And the way she deals with others outside of the family reflects on the character of the whole family as it's seen by the entire community. So, and this just isn't for the woman either. This happens to men as well, right? When a man goes out and does things he shouldn't be doing, people look at him, and the way we see it now is, he's ruined the family name. But that can happen from women as well. That can happen in a relationship, even before they're married, even while they're still in that time prior to marriage when they're working towards it to figure out if they're compatible, to figure out, is this what I'm really looking for? If either one goes and does something, well, I'm just going to say stupid, it has a way of reflecting back on that relationship, and that eats at that relationship, right? Now, this doesn't have anything to do with the way she keeps the house clean. It doesn't have anything to do with the way she oversees the children or the servants. This is about the way she interacts with people in the community where they live. And there's other places in the Bible where this is actually outlined for men as well. But this reminder is here actually for her to read and to remember. Isn't it amazing that Solomon just goes ahead and says, if you read this and you remember it, you're going to understand it. Because think about that. If somebody goes out and they purposely offend someone else, or even accidentally offend someone else, and they kind of get a little proud and don't want to apologize, don't want to ask for forgiveness, what does that say about that family? What does that? How do you look at people who do that? Do you look at their kids and go, it's no wonder those kids act the way they do? Look at their parents. We've heard that before. We've said that before too.
Yes.
And for the most part, it's accurate. If you deal equally with people, trust them, treat them fairly, treat them equally, treat them like people expect to be treated, you can expect people to look at you and your family and say, well, you know what? They have a good reputation in the community. Right? I mean, that just kind of makes sense, right?
Right.
Okay. This is one way that the wife helps to do her part in protecting the family from evil. And it really is as easy as loving the Creator in every way possible, treating others the way that they would have them treat you. Now, I can't emphasize enough, I'm not talking about the man-made doctrines and traditions that many denominations have today. Things like, well, you can't go to a dance. You can't go to the movies. You need to dress in a certain way, and maybe wear a certain uniform, wear your hair a certain way. These are the things that often separate believers from the people to which they're supposed to be the example. Let me say that again. If you're part of a group that practices more tradition, more doctrine, where you are overly regulated, let's put it that way, I understand that it's supposed to keep you separate, it's supposed to keep you holy, but what it actually does is it separates you from the people that you're supposed to be the example to, right? Am I making sense here?
Yes.
Okay. Every so often we'll go out to dinner with friends who don't believe the same way we do, right? Now, when we do that, we don't order the shrimp or the pulled pork, and we use that example to influence those friends that we're following the Creator's instructions. Now, do they sometimes poke fun at that? Yeah, of course they do, because they don't yet understand the importance of obedience. They haven't gotten that far. They're on that journey, maybe, some of them, but they're not there yet. When Myra goes with her mother to what I call the Old Hens Club, they often go to a place that serves unhealthy things. And she will get like the Caesar salad.
Right.
So that example is there. And I know that some of these older women, now when I say older women, she's the youngest one of that group by 30 years.
There's some that's 90.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, at least 25 years anyway. So, these people look at her, and I like to think it makes them aware that they're in the presence of somebody who's attempting to live the way they're designed to live. And that makes some people uncomfortable. When she's offering that example, what she's actually doing, is she is helping to prevent evil from influencing the rest of the family. She doesn't have any need to preach. She doesn't have any need to offer some man-made doctrine, because she's displaying her obedience to the Creator and not to a pastor, not to a church, not to any tradition. Those are the things we do. And I bring that up because, and I'm going to use another couple of examples here in a minute, but I bring these things up to say this is the way that we apply these things to our lives today. It's not difficult. You don't have to talk somebody's ear off. You don't have to preach at them. You don't have to shove things down their throat. You just simply live the way you're designed to live. Now, I could say a lot more about verse 12, but I'm running out of time, so let's move on. In verse 13, it says, she looks for wool and linen. She likes to work with her hands. In this, Solomon is making it sound like all women did was sit around and sew, and that's just not right. They sit around, they sew, they cook, they do it. That's not what he's saying here, even though that was primarily their I don't want to say job in the home. That was the way they looked after their home. They were in charge of that. So, unless the man's a tailor, the woman would sew clothes or blankets or whatever was needed for the home. But we know that from the other writings, the things we find, the archaeological evidence, what we might consider crafts today, they were done as well. Things were made, things were put together, things were crafted, I guess is what we'd say today, to make the home more enjoyable. Now, everybody should have something productive that they enjoy as a way to spend some relaxation time, when they have time to relax, right? I go out to my workshop and I build things from either wood or steel, but every so often, there's leather involved. Whatever might be laying around sometimes is involved. Whatever's left over from another project. Now, just the other day, Zoe was here, and I made a fly swatter out of leather. She punched the holes in the leather while I bent the wire for the handle. Now, I may have gone a little overboard on that because
I think so.
I'm telling you,
this
fly swatter will never wear out, and I think you can kill a rat with it. But and I think I made the comment that I'm certainly glad my mother didn't have one when I was young, because she may have wore it out on me.
We might not be here today if our mothers had that fly swatter.
But it works. Hey, it works. Myra's always had some kind of crafts that she does. Most recently, making cards of various kinds is how she is relaxing while she's recovering from surgery. Some people like to go fishing. It gets you away from the phone, the computer, gets you out of the office. Some people play golf, and I don't understand that because, I call it pasture pool. The thought of hitting a little ball as hard as you can and then chasing it, it just doesn't appeal to me. But for many people, it's their way of getting out and just kind of allowing the rest of the world to be without them for a couple of hours. And there's a lot of examples I could use. Some people like to sew quilts, others like to garden, some people like to bake for their relaxation. All of these things that we take for granted today were essential ways and parts of life in the past. Having a hobby is a good way to get our minds off the troubles and evils that are in the world today. We should be able to turn off the news and simply enjoy living, at least for a few minutes every day. It's been a few years since I've gone fishing, but I am anticipating that after we move, I'll be able to spend some time either a good trout stream or a lake where the bass are. And I'm guessing they're going to be pretty tasty.
Let's hope so.
I hope so. Now, if you notice, I didn't mention studying the Bible. That shouldn't be a hobby, and it shouldn't be treated as a hobby, although it should be enjoyable, right? Studying or reading the sacred word of our Creator should be something that's done as part of your covenant with your Creator. It should be taken seriously so that you are reminded of His part in that covenant as well as your own part in that covenant, right? So there's times when you need to go out and find things that you can work with that are productive in whatever way you need to be productive, so that you can relax, so that you can have some of that time to do things to kind of take your mind off the junk and the garbage that's in the world. Don't overlook those things. And that's what that verse is about. Making sure you take some time to do something that you have some productivity, something useful should come of it, even if it's just recharging your batteries, so to speak. Moving on to verse 14, she's like a trader's ship. She goes far to get food. Now, this translation really isn't accurate. More accurately, she is like a ship's merchant from a long way away. She brings the food. A wife should encourage her family not to be afraid of things from, a long way off. In Solomon's day, it may have been a new spice that she brings home, a different way to prepare a meal. Well, today, it could mean about the same thing. Produce is being shipped around the world from many nations. Everywhere, anywhere you can think of, at least here in the United States. Well, pre-COVID, we had a lot of places that were what we call ethnic markets, places that sell different foods. From locations all around the world. Sometimes we call them exotic places. our local grocery stores, where we live at least, don't offer a lot of these things. And even when we're at our local store, we will pass by a lot of the prepackaged stuff. We stick to the fresh vegetables, fresh breads when possible. But going to these ethnic markets, occasionally that I like saltfish. And you can't get them in our regular stores.
With breadfruit.
Yep. we like different spices, as long as they're packed with flavor. That is a requirement. It has to be flavorful. It can't just be spice for the sake of being spice. It can't be hot for the sake of being hot. It's got to have some flavor. We're not afraid to blend spices together so they have a unique flavor. A friend of ours is currently making various blends of vanilla. They get beans from different places and use various blends of alcohol to extract some really, and I mean really, really good flavors of vanilla. A household isn't supposed to be boring, right? And this verse is actually suggesting a way of helping to prevent that, and they use food as an example. Now, I realize that a lot of people around the world only have certain things available to them, right? They can only choose from a few things. If you're one of those folks, please remember that it might seem like the same thing day after day for you, but for other people around the world, they will probably see that as a delicacy. And I know that's kind of hard for some people to believe, but I grew up on a small grain and vegetable farm. We grew a lot of sweet corn, and I haven't had sweet corn in a while because I had it so much and so often. It was ridiculous. Just had a message, and somebody knows exactly what I mean. When you think about having to do the same thing day after day, having to eat the same thing day after day, it does get boring. But other people that would visit here came here specifically for that corn. We sold a lot of it. And when I say a lot, I mean a lot of it. Every morning we would be out there picking corn. And the bushels of corn that we picked were gone by the end of the day. So many, many people would come here specifically for that, even though I was tired of it. I didn't want it anymore. I still don't really care for it that much. Anyway, going on. Think about, the first pioneers who walked out from the comfort of their nearest civilization. And I'm not talking about just American pioneers. I'm talking about anybody around the world who left the nearest civilization and they walked out into the wilderness. What did they take with them? They didn't take a grocery store with them. They didn't take a clothing store. There was no department stores to drag along the way. Whether it was food, whether it was clothing, relaxation, they used what the Creator had provided for them. Today in many places, if we don't have a Wi-Fi signal, we think it's just a terrible, terrible thing, right? Oh, I can't use my iPad, can't do this, can't do that. Oh well. But when we're able to use the Creator's provisions wisely and follow His instructions, we're going to have a healthier, more joy-filled household. And it will be very far from boring. I'm going to share just a little something along those lines that happened with us this summer. Our son and his family was here for a couple of weeks, and his oldest daughter was having what she thought was a really bad day, right? She was upset and frustrated over whatever 13-year-old girls get upset and frustrated over. I don't know. I was never a 13-year-old girl, okay? Anyway, I took her out to the edge of the field, right? I handed her a shovel, a small shovel, okay, her size shovel. She'd never dug a hole before. She'd never done it. maybe a little hole in the sand, build a sandcastle with at the beach or something, but that's about it. But I gave her a little bit of instructions and some technical aspects about digging a perfect hole in the ground. And as she was doing that, I had the time to just give her some space and some encouragement. And I told her something that she'd never thought of, and that was there's a lot of answers at the bottom of a hole that you've just dug. And as she scooped out each small shovelful of dirt, that anger and frustration eased away. Now, why is that? She was doing something productive and different. It wasn't the same boring things that she was used to. There was no Wi-Fi, no iPad. She was learning to use her hands to do something useful. Her other grandmother gardens, and now she knows a better way to help. And before you accuse me of violating some child labor law, it was a very small hole, okay? It's not something you're going to set a fence post in. I've dug a lot of fence posts. That's why I know there's a lot of answers in the bottom of a hole. And you can leave a lot of trouble there, too. It wasn't big. It wasn't really deep. But it was enough for her to bury some of her frustration, some of her anger. It was big enough to teach. And that's what we're here for. In her place, she doesn't realize this. But it's building character when you learn to do something like that. Something you've never done before. Something productive. It builds character. It builds self-confidence. It builds self-worth when you do something like that. Hopefully, she will turn into a young lady who has a strong character, someone who will be strong and efficient, a woman that her husband will be able to trust completely, a woman who will be able to maintain the respect of herself and her family, someone who's anything but boring. I think she might get a little bit of that from this grandmother. Myra's anything but boring. And I pray that she finds a husband who deserves those qualities. So fathers, grandfathers, mothers, grandmothers, it's our job to teach those qualities in our children. How not to be boring. How to bring new things into your household. How to do things. And it's all here in Proverbs 31. And apparently we're going to continue with Proverbs 31. I'm a little over my time, but that's okay. As you think about these things, and I hope you do think about these things, what do you do to teach your young people around you? How to maintain that character, how to do things productively. We used to have a joke in the house that I was growing up in that was, if you had something to do that needed to be done, but it wasn't, it didn't have to be done right now. My father would often say, well, you can do that while you're resting. And it took me a long time to figure out what he meant. But now, many, many years later, I think I know. And I don't think he realized it was in Proverbs 31. But I think whoever taught him that may have known that. Maybe. So, did you have anything you wanted to add to all of that?
Thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll see you on Monday.
Absolutely. We will be back Monday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And if you are not able to join us then, please consider listening when you're able to. Until Monday, many, many blessings, everyone.